This is the new one. I haven't even read it yet. It just came out a month ago. Manifesto UF is urban fantasy, and the point of the urban fantasy book is that Tim Marquez, who writes urban fantasy, was tired of being compared to paranormal romance, which is vastly different from urban fantasy, even though they are kind of brother-sister. So it's supposed to be the manifesto, the defining short story anthology of what urban fantasy truly is. So, and my story in there is actually a fun one. It's actually about the Archangel Michael is hunting down the demon Baal in Hollywood, at the corner of Hollywood and Vine. And that famous corner is where they duke it out, and all the spectators think it's just a Hollywood stunt. So, kind of a little bit of tongue-in-cheek in that one as well. My series of books. My series of books are fantasy fiction, traditional fantasy fiction, a little bit of darkness. This one is definitely the scarier of the two books, and since we are going into Halloween was why I decided to read from this one. The complexity of the story makes it very hard to pick a selection. So the two selections I picked, there's a little bit of background that needs to be brought into play. So I brought this cool little things to do, little piggies on it, to keep me guided as to what I'm supposed to talk about, so that everyone knows where we're at when I start the book. This is the sequel to The Wrong Way Down. The Wrong Way Down, the concept is that there's actually 4 protagonists, but there's 2 central protagonists, 2 secondary protagonists. The secondary protagonists don't show up until halfway through the end of the first book. The 2 primary antagonists come from a remote pilgrimage church where there is a sacred artifact there that has been stolen. That sacred artifact they believe is part of their god. It's a relic known as LaSalle's Grace, and it is a healing scepter of incredible magnitude. The priestess Papalia and her trusted assistant and protector Wanker are basically, well, they're not charged with finding it, but because of circumstances they end up becoming the ones most likely to find it, so they step up and take the quest on. And ends up becoming it ends up being the wrong way down. She ends up becoming labeled a heretic, and they both become outlaws, and that's pretty much where the first book ends. And so I told you the entire first book, you don't have to buy it now. So that's basically where the first one starts. So Wanker, who I intentionally named like Wanker, is an elf, a true-blooded elf, unlike Tolkien's elves. Elves in my series are not immortal. They do have an expiration date. They tend to live longer than people, though, so they tend to be wiser than people. But their aging curve is different, too. So even though Wanker is around 42 years old when the story begins, he's actually about 22 in his maturity. Actually, he's 44. So he's like 22 in his maturity. The life cycle is generally twice as long as humans. People, of course, live to the age people do. There's an interesting thing in the story is that elves generally stick to the wilderness. They don't want to deal with people because people are people. It's really that simple. People tends to be, they breed like rabbits. They're basically overpopulating the planet, and the elves really just kind of want to sit in their own little area and be elves. Papalia is the priestess of this church who believes in a God who is the source of all questions, not the answer of all questions. And so that kind of puts a really cool little spin on it because she doesn't have any of the answers. She's seeking the answers, which kind of makes her kind of a fun philosophical character. She has a very strong, regimented view of what is right and what is wrong. And it's also a very naive view of what is right and what is wrong. So it tends to be very black and white, which can make her very difficult to deal with. So she's a very fun character to play with. The 2 others that come into the story, the secondary protagonists, are Seth and Raynal, and they're a little bit lawless. They were orphans, and one is a half-elf because, in Tolkien's books, men and elves couldn't really do it together, but In my books, they can. It's not really a choice, though. It's kind of it's not looked well to be half-elf. There's also half-orcs in the books. Similar to Tolkien's books, there aren't orcs in my books. They're different again. How Tolkien had written his orcs were that they were basically elves that had been so mistreated and, by the evil one Sauron, that they had corrupted and became these awful beasts that hated life. And so they were a corrupted elf. Mine are actually more tribal, again, kind of sticking with a more tribal but barbaric kind of cannibalistic style of tribe. So there's also high orcs, which are civilized half-orcs, and there's half-orcs, which are uncivilized half-orcs. What else do you need to know? Last other thing you need to know, before I can read, is that the place Dilligan's Free Post is also Dead Rick's Outpost, and it is why it's called, well, there's a lore behind it. Dead Rick's is the nickname for the place. Dilligan's is the traditional name. I just want you to know that if those two words come up, they're actually the same place. And there's a mercenary army that is based there called the Regulators, and they control the trade roads. So that is what you need to know about this before I can read. And now I need something to drink so I can read. Chapter 1, Day 11, 8 a.m., the day it all went wrong. Wenker had predicted rain would come, but it wasn't a far stretch for the imagination. Bruised and heavy, the clouds rolled across the sky since before dawn, ready to burst. Now the rain fell over the valley and the foothills at a gentle rhythm. At their elevation in these mountainous foothills, each dampening drop made it feel colder. Behind them in the lower valley, smoke curled like a tiny black ribbon from the woods into the background of the ominous clouds. Having reached the crest of an overlooking hill, the four riders took advantage of their elevated view. Miles behind them, they watched where Dilligan's Free Post burned. Sitting atop a black mare he'd stolen twice, Randall shook his head while looking in the direction from which they'd come. An elvish longbow rested over one shoulder, beside his backpack and quiver. Shaking his head again, words accompanied Randall's motion. I can't believe it. Twice now in the same week, I'm riding away from another burning building. Priestess Papalia had never approved of the archers' unlawful skills, even if they were partially responsible for helping them escape from death. Twice. 4 days ago, to escape a violent situation in Capital City, he broke into the library and stolen the very horses they now rode. That was the first time their steeds had been stolen. This fact contributed greatly to why the Free Post now burned. Pointing at the priestess, Reynold the half-elf objected. Since I've met you, I've killed 2 high orcs and a dumb boy, not to mention your good pal Stiller this morning. I've had to escape a burning building and break out of jail to dodge a death sentence. He held up 4 fingers. I've been with you 4 days. Papalia shook her mane of curly red hair before pulling the hood over her white robe up and over. Around her neck and fitting inside nickel eyelets, a blue silk ribbon ran the length of her robe's opening, tied together with a silver sash. As she tucked her hair underneath her hood, she also watched the smoke from atop her tan and white horse. She responded calmly to Reynold's accusation. Wanker and I were doing fine without violence and thievery before you came along. Don't try to pin this on us. Beyond Wanker's sword, we haven't any other weapons, and we were protected by the shield of faith. Wanker rode upon a small messenger pony and stayed behind the others. He saw the smoke well enough from where he sat. Being a full-blooded elf, he stood nearly the same height as Papalia. Defensively, he said, "What would you two have done, I didn't have too many options to choose from. It isn't Papalia's fault that Stiller set us up." Wanker emulated Reynold by holding up 4 fingers. Twice in 4 days. The 4th rider present was Seth. Seth's steed was a powerful workhorse. It would have been too big for any of the others to ride, but the steed fit the burly warrior well. His armor was crafted mostly of leather, but had been reinforced at critical areas with iron bars and small plates. Seth wasn't the best armorer, but the modifications he'd added had kept him alive through a fair number of fights. Adding to the conversation, Seth denied Papalia's claim. The gang of thieves in Capital City came with you, not us. Seth watched where the rain fell harder, right above where the smoke was starting to break up. Pointing at Wanker, he added, "Now that I'm thinking about it, it was you who started that fire back at the bar where we met." Lightning arced from the sky at the distant plains as Papaya defended the elf. "If either of you had been in Wanker's shoes, you'd have done the same thing." Reynolds shrugged. "Pick a fight with two high orcs? I doubt it." Seth nodded, enthusiastically agreeing with the priestess. "Yeah, you're probably right. Ascalon's stick. Ain't I right, Raynal?" Raynal laughed, finding humor with his brother's statement. Not understanding, Papaya asked, "What is Ascalon's stick?" Grinning, the big warrior answered, "The orphanage we grew up was called the Ascalon Home for the Wayward." Reynolds' chuckle stopped as he tried to explain. "Bane's blood. I forgot all about Ascalon's stick. Till you mentioned it. That was the orphanage slogan, their mantra. They told us the truth was absolute and it's never divided. The truth sticks when the false slips." Their philosophy was if Ascalon's wayward kids obeyed all their rules, they would be made strong. Seth scoffed. "Stupid philosophy and stuff. I was actually the opposite. We'd break a rule, they'd beat us with a stick, and we got stronger. But God pound all that bullshit. I'm just saying I'd have done my own type of damage to get you free, bro." "Whatever," Reynolds snorted while pointing at the dark streaks in the sky, where the rain could be seen falling out of the clouds. "That fire will be out soon, thanks to the rain. Just look at it coming down. Commandant Benning and his regulators are going to want revenge. I'll bet he's the type that will chase us all the way to Land's Edge. Uptight prick." "Bah," Papaya waved her hand at Reynolds, dismissing his pessimism. "They'll be too busy rebuilding their barracks to chase us. We're the last of their problems." Seth laughed. "Yeah, not to mention, they'll need to go find all their horses before they can give chase. I'm agreeing with Reynolds, though. Let's put some distance between them and us." Reynolds nodded. "Word will travel fast. We need to get through Fairdale Pass before our reputation arrives. I doubt we'll be so lucky next time." Wanker chuckled. "Well, since we released all their horses, we can only travel as fast as it can walk." Papaya looked at the half-elf and said, "Reynolds, you need to believe me. If we can recapture Katia before Fairdale Pass, we might never see another regulator." Her eyes fell again to the shrinking cloud of smoke rising above the tree line in the distance. Bitterly, Reynolds added, "I'm tired of thinking about the past and the pile of trouble that is following us. We're going to need to stay ahead of a giant shit wave to get this done. Once we have Katia, we better be holding your damn healing rod next." "Do you have to use such foul language all the time?" Papaya criticized. Reynolds turned his horse and looked up the side of the steep mountains. Late spring snow still held high on the tip-top peaks. Unsure where Fairdale Pass would be, he knew he couldn't see it from his current position. Instead, what he saw before him was an impassable wall, cold and eternal. Frustrated by his thoughts and annoyed with Papaya, Reynolds replied, 50 pieces of gold will not make this mess go away. Your church will embrace you as their savior, Priestess Papaya. My brother and I, we're dead meat." His fingers pointed in the direction of the smoke. "Very painfully, we will be left to pay your toll again." Winker said nothing. He rubbed the side of his pony's neck and watched Papaya. Seth spoke up. "I can't pay for this. This isn't even our tab. We certainly didn't start it. Why should we pay for it?" "Well," Papaya started to say, "sitting here on the road and looking behind us isn't going to solve any of our problems. Don't discount the power of the great mystery. As I see it, we're not dead yet. When we get Katia, she can pay, because all this is on her tab. She and her pal Thorjan." One of Reynolds' pointed ears poked out through his blonde hair. "You're just using us now. My brother might be dumb enough to fall for your tricks, but I know what I smell upwind." The half-elf set his horse in motion. "Don't call me dumb, Reynolds," Seth followed. "I know what's upwind, too." So that's the end of chapter 1. So that kind of gives you a basic idea of how the characters don't like each other, and they're kind of stuck together. They have a large army of mercenaries that want them dead, and they're trying to capture a thief who's somewhere on the road up ahead, and things get worse when they find a ransacked caravan on the side of the road, and Reynolds will continue to argue that there is no survivors. Papaya will argue that there is survivors. They will seek them out anyway, which ends up leading to a very bad rescue mission that doesn't go very well at all. So the other part I was going to read to you was actually from chapter 40. I was going to read you chapter 40 because this wasn't supposed to be reading for darker purposes, so that you could see like some of the scarier stuff. And the funny thing about this book is that there's some really good, frightening things in this story. Some good, true, I wouldn't call it horror, but real fear, where, but it's so complex and it's so layered that the experience of reading it is so much better than the experience of hearing it. So it was difficult to find a spot that I thought would be, that would grasp that same level of intensity, but not need that much background. And here, chapter 40, I found